Okay, so a couple of things here about function as a service that we haven't gone into before is that the idea of a function in Python is that it really is the building block for anything fun. So GPU programming, which we've done before, Cloud Functions, which we're going to get into, AWS Lambda, Pandas, if you want to do an operation in Pandas, you want to do a decorator like a timing decorator or a logging decorator. You want to do parallel programming with multiprocessing library. You want to build a command line tool with click. You want to build a web app. Pretty much all those, just in a few lines of code, you can do it with a function. So in the cloud era, really a function is kind of where it's at. And so what I'm going to do next year is show you this framework on AWS called Chalice, which in a way would be a competitor to AWS Lambda plus Terraform. And let me first just show you from a high level some of the takeaways is that one thing you do have to do with Chalice that's slightly different than, let's say, AWS Cloud 9 is that you do have to use config files, I'm sorry, API keys. That's just the way it works. So if you do develop this on Cloud 9 and you want to do all the automatic things that it does, you will have to create the API keys, which you can do in the IAM system. But the neat thing about it is if you look at this, you can create a virtual environment, which you see right here, and then you also can get this structure, and you can notice here that it's a little bit like App Engine in a way, where just with a few lines of code, you can build a web service, and then you can go through and run this web service. And then this is Chalice local, but it also, if you type in Chalice deploy and you've got these keys set up, you can automatically do a deployment. It also can do timed Lambda. So let's say you wanted to build a timer like which we did last week. You could also do a timer like this, or you could do an event-driven one. So if you want to set something up that listens to S3. So it is pretty interesting. It's an interesting little framework. So let me just show you a couple things about that real quick. So I'm going to go to AWS console here, log in, and I'll put in my auth code here. Let's go to auth. Okay. 284. There we go. So I'm going to go just grab any Cloud9 environment here. I'll just grab this one. And I'm only going to go through part of this because I'll only go through the local aspect of it because I don't want to set up API keys. But if you did want to work in your own computer, for example, this Chalice does work pretty well with that because you can set those API keys up locally. But basically, here's some. I'll do it again here. So the way you would start this is I'll just copy this code up here. Is I would do something like this. So I would create a virtual environment and activate it like that. If I didn't already create this, there we go. And you can see I sourced it. And then I would do a pip install of, I think it's a pip3 install of Chalice. Uh-oh, I'm running out of space. So let me delete some things here. I'll delete. I don't think I need that much room. I'll just delete a few projects on here. Okay, so if I do df, I think I have enough space. I have 120 megabytes. That's probably enough for this demo. So basically, to then do an install, I would say pip3 install Chalice like this, and to create a new project, I think it's just Chalice. You can actually run help, and it will show you all the different commands. But you can say new project. So if I said new project here, this just creates a scaffolding, and we'll just call this I don't know, hello. And if I cd into there, it again, it looks a little bit like App Engine, where if I just open this up, you can see it creates this really simple web app for me like this. Now, in this case, I'll change this to, actually, I might be in the wrong. think I'm in, yeah, I think I'm in the wrong directory. Let me go to this one, hello. There we go. So it creates this hello world application. If you scroll down, it also gives you examples of other routes, like if you wanted to create a full route. So to me, what's cool about this is it actually simplifies a little bit some of the stuff that you would do, if you were going to go through and, if we saw this before, you could go through here and create your Lambda and build all this stuff up. This library is created by the people that create Bodo, the SDK for AWS. So they have a lot of experience with AWS, and there's some things that are pretty interesting about it. Anyway, long story short, if I want to change this and I say UNCC, right, hello world, and if I could even change this route here, and we can call this route hello, like that. And I can go through here and I can say Python, or I can say Chalice local. That's how you run it locally, like that. It'll run this. If oh, let's see here. What am I messing up here? App hello. Weird. That's very interesting. Maybe I already had something running or something like that. I'm not sure, but let's run it again. Yeah, I might have already had it running or something. So if I go to Chalice local, you can see it. It's serving out traffic locally here. I can open up a new shell, and I could do a curl command, and then I could just curl that route like this. And from here, I could type in hello, and you could see it returns back the hello, and I could see in the other terminal that it was actually called. So that's kind of all I'll go into, because the rest of it you can absolutely do, but you have to set up the API keys. But if you want to play around with something that's pretty powerful, like it's a lot like Ruby on Rails or Flask or something like that, this thing is kind of a fun thing to play around with. But again, remember, this is the piece that you have to set up, or you don't get all the automatic stuff. What is cool about it though is that if I did have those keys set up, I could just go like this, and it would just automatically deploy that Lambda function, and you would have it, running somewhere. So there's a lot to like about this framework, uh, and so let's go to the next question here with. So another question is, what if the service is already different architecture? How is the easy migration? So any of this function as a service stuff here, if we go to serverless, it really is a different architecture. So it's more likely that a company will need to design their system to be more event based, and so I'm going to get into that in a second. But let's look at the serverless stuff here. So if you go to this serverless framework, this is yet another technology that is fairly popular. I don't personally use it, but a lot of people do use it, and it's a framework that works on all cloud providers, and you can actually use it to deploy functions on. And I think they have here, they tell you all the targets. Let's see here. It goes to, if I go to documentation, uh, let's see, tutorials. I think they have a target where they say all the different locations. But in a nutshell, it's AWS, Google, Microsoft, and then also like a function as a service, which I think is a concept of Apache. It's called OpenWhisk, which is another framework. But that's another one. I won't go into it, just to put on your radar. But let's talk a little bit about Google Cloud Functions, which are similar really to AWS Lambda. They're really kind of a copy of each other. And why would you use it? And this goes to the question of, like, what are the use cases here? Really, the use cases are data processing. So if you are doing things with data processing, you want to do cloud computing, you want to do data engineering, really the functions are a very, very strong use case for this. And so here's an example. This is directly from Google. You listen and respond to cloud storage events like file creation, changes, or removing things, processing images, performing video transcoding, validate, transform data. So really, data engineering is a strong, strong use case for why you would use Google Cloud Functions or AWS Lambda. Pretty much they're interchangeable. Webhooks is another one. So you want to build something that responds to some third-party system. Let's say you're building, and there's a lot of people that are probably looking for engineers that know how to automate things. So this is a great career opportunity as well as, hey, we're using Slack now, and we want someone that can automate a lot of the things we do in our company into Slack. And I want to create events that populate into Slack. Well, that's the stuff you could do with Google Cloud Functions or GitHub, like GitHub triggers, like when people commit code, maybe I want to do some kind of an operation that bundles my software together, or Stripe, I want to do some kind of operation where when someone does a purchase, I send them an email. Making APIs, that's another one. So if you want to build a really quick API, I think you could, over the course of a day or two, you could probably build something really quickly with this serverless technology. Another one is mobile backend. So this is if you're a mobile first company, and like there are some companies that are mobile first, like for example, WeChat is really an example of a mobile first company. You can't even use the desktop app, really doesn't work that well. I have some people I talk to in WeChat, and it's all mobile based. So you could hook in these functions and actually have the functions respond to mobile operations. And then this is another one that's really a big one, is that in terms of IoT, that a lot of companies are probably interested in doing IoT. So here's a good example of why would you care about IoT? So that's Internet of Things. Well, we know now that in fact, South. If we look at NPR, this is a good example of IoT in action here. Let's go to NPR and let's look at. I think there was South Korea. If I just look at this, where is South Korea? Where is a search on NPR? Well, I guess haven't gone to NPR's website. Here we go. Let's look for South Korea. Here we go. This is a good story. So here's an example. There's a lot of I've worked all over the world, and there's many places in the world that do things better than the United States. And this is this is a data-driven chart here that says that there's a very different thing that's happening. The U.S., we have a linear curve that shows the rate of COVID-19, and if you look at more densely populated regions, including South Korea, in Japan, Singapore, Hong Kong, you can see that this is logarithmic, right? So they're doing something very differently. So what are they doing differently? Well, if you look at what South Korea is doing, they actually have integrated systems. So they have checks here where they're going through and they're doing temperature checks. They have all kinds of systems that are checking things throughout the entire country to make sure that the spread is not being put all over the place. And so this is really an example of how IoT could do the same thing. Is that if you have a band on your wrist and the band actually transmits your temperature maybe every minute somewhere, and you had every single person in your country that had that device, you could have a cloud function or a AWS Lambda function processing that information and actually going through and actually observing all that. So really this IoT in the era that we're in could really be a strong use case. One, it could help humanity, and then two, it's exactly the kind of thing that you would do with a cloud function, and so it might be something to play around with here. So what I'm going to do next here is I'm going to get into the GCP cloud real quick, and I will go over here and spin this thing up. So let's go to GCP. And what I'm going to do here is just is set up a kind of go through a tutorial of how you would use Google Cloud Functions and actually do something that's somewhat useful with Google Cloud Functions. So they're very similar to AWS Lambda, and the way you get access to them, either they would be in this resources tab here like this, or the Cloud Functions, you could just search for them as well. So you could just go like this and go to Cloud Functions. So here's an example. I have Cloud Functions. Next up, what we can do is actually just say create function. So this looks a lot like AWS Lambda's console here. And what I can do here is put in some name for what I want a function to be. In this case, maybe I'm gonna create one called a Wikipedia function. So we'll call Wikipedia UNC C, and inside of here, notice there's a trigger here. You notice this trigger. This is again identical to the way AWS works, or what we were talking about earlier about events. So the trigger is whatever you want to call this. So it could be a web service, HTTP, it could be PubSub, which is very similar to Amazon SQS, like a messaging system. It could be storage. It could be, I think they have an IoT. I guess IoT would go into PubSub here, or it could be a bunch of mobile stuff like authentication or talking to a database on a mobile system. We're gonna use HTTP here, and notice how it creates a URL for you automatically. And another thing that you can do is you can allow unauthenticated invocations here, which just lets you test it. So everything I'm building, you can test yourself as well. And again, just like AWS Lambda, you can edit this thing in line. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick the source code. I'm going to go to Python 3.7 like this. And you can see that it puts in really like this kind of default scaffolding here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it a little bit more interesting, and I'm going to make it do something useful. So what I will do is I'll go back to this function as a service link here, and I think I have some code that that I'll explain what it does. So let's go to here. I'll just make this next to it. So I'm going to just paste this in here. Let's just grab all this, delete it, paste this in. Let's just make sure that looks good. So first I import a library called Wikipedia. It doesn't do much. All it does is grab a web page from Wikipedia. That's it. Now, just like Lambda, though, we have to make sure that we get the third-party library. Google Cloud Function makes it a little bit easier because inside of their interface, it builds in this requirements.txt. So if I click on this, I can just type in Wikipedia and it will install it for me, which is pretty cool. So that's a really fun prototyping aspect of this. Now let's go back to this main.py here. Now notice also that you can actually tell it to change the function that's called. And this is different than AWS Lambda. AWS Lambda, if you remember, has something called Lambda handler. You have to call your function the one that gets called. And in our case, we can call it whatever we want. This is where the function to execute is. So I'm going to tell it, I want you to call something called hello Wikipedia. So I'm going to change this like this. And notice a couple things that I'm doing here. So one is that you see it accepts a request. Inside this request, it's actually using the Flask request library, which is the popular web framework that we've used. And what I do is I look inside for a payload called entity. And if it finds that, it actually goes through and it grabs that out of my payload. I print it out. And this is also a nice trick to know about, is when you're building these services, it's always a good idea to put some debugging code inside of here. And in fact, I'll make it a little bit easier. I'll do this. I'll say, this is my entity. And then I will actually put in the variable that's passed in so that I can see what it is. So this is one of the most common places that you'll make a mistake, is if you don't add enough debugging code. with these kind of functions, these cloud functions, is really difficult to understand what's happening. So again, I go through here, I take this request, I grab out the entity that I'm about to pass in, and then I pass that that data structure into this Wikipedia library. And you can see it doesn't do much. All it does is grab a web page from Wikipedia. In fact, I can make it a little bit bigger though. Let's make it like three sentences long. Maybe grab the first three sentences from Wikipedia, and then it just returns back the result just like that. And if I don't have a payload that says entity, this will just return back no payload. And I guess I had some other extra code in there. There we go. So I'm going to go ahead and create this, and it'll take just a second. And you will see here that it makes this function available. Now, one of the things that I'm going to show you that's kind of cool here is that you can also simultaneously look at the function using Google Cloud Shell. So if I click on this link here, activate Cloud Shell, what's cool is that you can actually essentially interrogate the function via the command line. So let's kind of do both things at the same time. So one of the things you can do is, if I go back to my example code here, you can just type in Google Cloud Functions describe like this. And as long as you're in the same project that your cloud function is in, you can describe the name of the function you created. So we have this one like this, and I can go ahead and describe it like that. And I'll make this a little bit bigger. And you can see it tells you a bunch of information about that cloud function. So it says that's the entry point. So it tells me the function that's going to get called. It tells me how much memory. It tells me the URL as well. And then it also shows me if it's actually active and what the runtime is. So you can see that this is actually active. So it's available for service. So how do we test this out? A couple different ways we can test this out. Let me show you the easy way first. There's actually three different ways we can test this out. So first up, I'm going to click on it. And what I will do is go to this testing icon here, if you see the testing. And inside of here, it's going to give me the ability to play around with this payload. So I'm gonna go inside of here and put in the payload that it's expecting. If you remember, we said entity was what was going to be in the JSON data structure. So entity here, and then for here we'll put Google like that. And I'm going to click test this function just like this. And if I click on test, it will send that into my function. And look, we can see that it was able to grab that information out. So again, just a little teeny bit of code, and I have something that's pretty useful, and I can start to build it more and more complex stuff on top of it. So that's one way we can test this. Another way we can test this is I can go here to this command line tool here, and instead of describe, what I can do is I can say call like this, and then I can actually pass in data just like this is doing from the command line. So I can go here and I can say data, and then I can put in a JSON payload. So when you're doing things from the command line here, you have to escape it. So I'm going to put in outer single quotes. So this will be entity, and then instead we'll put Facebook. So we'll change it up a little bit so you can see that I can do dynamically different things. And there we go. So you can see now, so this is super, super helpful because you can start to build these cloud functions that do really complex things for you. Like maybe they train a machine learning model, or they clean some service for you. And then you could use the Cloud Shell. I can imagine someone in a company making, like, let's say 100 of these cloud functions that each one of them does something special. And then throughout your day, you call these different cloud functions from the command line to help automate things. So this is another, I think, really useful use case for cloud functions is can you use them to actually automate things and actually make your life easier? So that's the second way. Now let me show you the third way to do it, which is we also can call it via a curl command. And so what we can do for that is I'm going to just look up real quick. Let's see, curl posts with JSON example right here. I'm lazy. I'll just find something on the internet. Let's see, how do I post JSON with curl? Let's see, I use this command. Let's see. There we go. Let's use this. This looks like a good command here. So I'm going to go back here, and I'm going to. I might even have a gist already of this. I think I did. I think I've already done this. Let's see here. See all of my gists here. Nope, I didn't do it. Huh, interesting. Well, I'll paste this in. I'll just paste this inside of here. So I can paste this into the command line. So a couple different things to remember here is that this is putting content type JSON. So this tells the curl command to send a JSON payload. I'm going to do a request. And then the only things I need to change here are going to be the let me just make sure I see everything here. So I think I need to. This looks better. I'm going to grab this one right here, like this, and I'm going to just get out of here. So Control C. I'm going to paste this command just like that. So I need to put, I think at the end of this, the URL that I need to call. So I can go back to the function and I can find out what this URL is going to be. What is it going to be? It's going to be, where is it? Trigger. Here we go. It's going to be this. So I'm going to copy this URL like that. And then I'm going to put in the data here. I'm going to put in the payload that will let us call this. So I'm going to put in entity, and then let's just do Google again. Let's make it simple. And if I got this correct, that should, there we go. So it works. So now I can pass this to you like this, and I'll put this into a gist here. Let's go to here, and we'll just say curl gcp.sh like that, and then I can just copy this, and then I can put this into like a Slack channel so that other people can try it out. So basically anybody in the world now can call my I create an API, and what the API does is allow someone to proxy into GCP for me. So again, three ways to do it: test in the function, you can test in the command line tool, or you can just curl it. And that's what most people are going to do if you're building a web service, is you want people to use your web service, and you can use the curl command. So this is pretty useful, but let's make it even more useful, because let's actually use Google's natural language processing API to actually translate this web page into another language. And that really will kind of bring this thing to the next level. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, sure. Um, so with Google Cloud Functions, if we go back here, they're a little less evolved than AWS, and so they do things a little bit different in that they here's how you could, it's a little less functional in terms of templates. What they do have is this, is if you select the different triggers, it will show you how to call it from that trigger. So this is kind of interesting, right? Like, so if I wanted to talk to something in Google Cloud Storage, this shows you how it would work, right? So if I change this, it will go through and it will change the nature of the template, right? So in a way, it's like very basic templates. Feedback. It has yeah, yeah. So so what I'll do next is let's now build a slightly more complex and realistic scenario, which is again, imagine you're working at a company and they hired you as the machine learning engineer or the data engineer, and they say, look, we've moved remote now. We need you to build a system that calls out to this other website, pulls the data from that website, and then translates it into multiple languages for us because we need to use that information for our machine learning system. Well, how would you do that? Well, with Cloud Functions, you can do it very, very quickly. So that's what we're going to do next here is I'm going to go back to functions here, and I'm going to make a new one, and we'll call this one translate Wikipedia, which hopefully I didn't already make one called that. I did. So we'll call this translate. I'll just call Wikipedia translate. There we go. Or wiki translate. That's a good name. Translate. Keep everything the same. Keep the HTTP trigger the same, but I'm going to swap this out to Python 3.7, and I'm going to go grab, I think I have a big example of this. I didn't, that's funny that I didn't put this in there. The let me see if I can find this code. I have an example of a more complex function here. Let me look at the gist here. Maybe it's in my gist. I think it is in the gist. Let's see. Yeah, here we go. So it's this gist here. So I'll put this into Slack here. So basically, I'm going to grab all this and then I'll walk through what it does. So actually, maybe before I put it in, let me just walk through what it does. That's probably even easier. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to still use Wikipedia, but I'm going to use a second system, which is I'm going to use the translation API from Google. So I'm going to say from Google Cloud import translate, and then I'm going to put a function here, and all it does is it translates whatever text that I put in. And the only thing that it's going to need is a project ID and the text. And so the project ID would be the project that I'm currently in. So then really, I just put one line below here. That's it. That would swap things out. So notice that if you were using this, you would put your own project ID inside of here, not my project ID. So I will go back here and paste this into a new function. So we'll go through here, and I'm going to just select all like this, and I'm going to paste this in. And let's just look really quickly here. Again, I have a translate function. I have this new a new signature here, so I'm going to have to change that to translate test. So let's change that like that. And now what I will do is I also need to change the requirements. So I need to put in here Wikipedia, that's one. And let me just look really quickly here as well with GCP translate. We need to look at the right import method for this. So Google has translation, they have natural language processing, they have all kinds of stuff. If I go through here and I look at their cloud translation API, they should have some documentation here that shows how the API works. Yeah, here's version 2 of the API, here's version 3. So they say right here, here's quick start, how to use it. And they say that I need to do some kind of, here we go. I need to install this. So I need to put this into my my requirements file right here. So I also need to put that in. Wikipedia, and then Google Cloud Translate. And then once I've got that set up, I should be good to go. But let's also just look at the payload that I'm going to put inside of here. So you can see that by default, it'll translate it from English to French. Now later I could make a more complex payload that translates that. Maybe it takes in any language, it translates it in any language, but let's leave it there by default. And I'm gonna go ahead and click create. Okay, so we got this thing running here. So again, what's fun about these cloud functions is that pretty much anything you can think of, you can build this functionality together, and then have essentially pipeline things together. So in this case, I'm grabbing it from a web interface, but maybe instead you actually have a bunch of data in a S3 bucket, and people are putting things in an S3 bucket. Maybe you work for a publishing company and they have books inside of Google Cloud Storage, and you want to translate the books. As soon as somebody puts a manuscript in there, you automatically translate it to some other language. Really, it's up to your imagination what it is you really want to build. So this should take just a second, and this should translate things from English to French. Let's test this out. Now, one other thing to point out while this thing's running here is that you do need to set up a couple things. So in one of the things that you have to set up here is that you do have to make sure that the API is enabled. So if you want to try out this same thing here, you do need to make sure that billing's enabled, you have enabled the API, or else this won't work for you. So now we've got this working. I'm going to click on Wikipedia Translate here, and then go to testing, just like this. And then we'll put in the same thing. We'll put in entity, and we'll do Google, and then that will translate it to French, hopefully. There we go. So pretty cool that you can automatically. And so I think the next thing that would make it even easier, and this will be the last thing that I really demo, and then I can go to some questions, is that I want to show you now how to edit a function that's already been deployed. So this is pretty useful, but in the real world, you're going to have to go back and forth and kind of tweak things. So for example, this is not as useful as it could be because I've hard-coded the languages inside of here. So instead, what I want to do is actually find a list of languages here that Google supports. Here we go, translation. Let's look at the languages that it supports. They've got to have a link here somewhere where they show you Google Cloud languages. Let me just find this real quick. So, or translate languages, translate language lists, language code. Let's see if they have a list of all the different codes here. Let's see if this shows us the codes here. Yeah, there's got to be a list here of all the languages that are supported. To get a list of all the languages that it supports, well, I mean, I guess that's one way to do it. Is I could run this, or I guess I could. Let's see. Is there a command line? Let's. I guess I could. Oh, okay, cool. There we go. Thank you. So, okay, we got a list of all languages. Awesome. So what I can do now is go back to this function, edit it, and we'll tweak this. So we'll make this thing instead of this target language here. What I can do is just swap out a variable in here and make it also take a language, right? So we can just go here and we'll just say language like that. and maybe by default we'll make it French, but I can just swap this out with language, just like that. So now I've got a function that I can pass. I can pass a keyword argument into this function, and then inside of this thing, I just need to have it take another payload. So that's pretty easy. I just go here and I say language like this, and I say requests JSON, and then we'll just say language. And then what I'm going to do is also just make my debugging a little bit better here. So I'll go and I'll say print this is the language, and then I'll put in this language, and then I'll say the same thing for this, and I'll say this is the entity, and do this entity, and that looks correct here. So this will just let me make sure that I understand what's kind of coming inside of here. And I guess if I wanted to be really verbose, I could even say, I could even print the whole payload as well. So I could say, you know, this is my payload that gets passed in, and I could say request.json, requests JSON, or request JSON, sorry, request JSON. Okay, and then I just make sure I take that variable that's passed in here, and then I put here, I just put in, well, I'll just wrap this around like that, and then I'll say language is equal to language. Again, if you're trying the same thing out, you must change this to be your own project or else it won't work. So we'll just say language is equal to language, or language is equal to language, right? Because I set that right here. And I'm gonna pass in whatever language is passed in. So that looks like that should work in theory. And I can even be bold here and copy this whole thing and put it into a gist so that other people can get access to it. If this works, we'll say language translate.py. Okay, throw this into Slack. Hopefully this works on the first time. And then deploy this. So this now makes it even more useful in that I can actually pass in inside of the JSON payload also the languages. Now it's not only does it accept any company, but also any language to translate it into. And this is where I wanted to also show you that I could describe this function now because it's in the middle of being updated. If I do this and I do it quick enough, it should show that the version 1 is active, right? So this shows me that the version 2 is not yet deployed. So that can be pretty useful to really debug something when you're deploying. Is this will let you see which version. Okay, so now we know version 2 is active. So this is actually even so it's actually was a little behind what the command line tool says. So if I go back to testing here, I should be able to, if I didn't blow it up, I should be able to say entity, and we'll do Facebook this time. And then for language, I will put in some other language. Let's do something fun here. So maybe Africans, okay? And let's put this in here. Let's see if this works. There we go. So we're able to train, and then if I want to try a different language, maybe we'll try simplified Chinese. Let's do that. Let's translate it. There we go. So pretty powerful, ability to just build and kind of encapsulate all this stuff together in one system. So a couple other things I'll show you before I stop this demo is that you also can go to the logs right here and look, see how I put those log messages? I said, this is my payload. This is really helpful and in my opinion, required when you're building these things is you have to build that instrumentation in so you can see what's happening. You can see here that, look, each of those things, I'm able to actually debug it because I put that into my source code. So really, that's it. That's super quick demo. I will stop recording because that was really the gist